All right, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? Welcome back to another exciting episode of Bigfoot the Truth Told. Now, if you're seeing this title, you're saying, this was supposed to happen 3 days ago. Yes, it was supposed to happen 3 days ago, but we had some technical difficulties that we weren't able to make this happen. But tonight, this evening, so far, so good. Everything's looking good. Um, you know, Thomas, I just want to say thank you for sticking out with me and going through the technical difficulties that I had. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is the host of Sasquatch Island on Monster X Radio. This is Mr. Thomas Sewid. How you doing, bud?
Doing good. Hello, everyone out there that's watching and listening.
So, I guess I know I hate you've probably done this 1,000 times, but just in case, those who do not know who you are, can you give a little bit of background on you?
My name is Tom Sewid. I'm a First Nations or North American Indian from the west coast of Canada, from British Columbia. I've lived and worked on northern Vancouver Island all my life. I was born in a little community up there called Alert Bay, which as a young boy, you would walk by the graveyard and see all these big memorial totem poles for chiefs that have passed. And I think three of them had carvings of Junahwa, the wild woman of the woods, a female Sasquatch, according to our tribe's perspectives and carvings and art. And my family was commercial fishermen, still are. So I worked my way up after high school onto the boats full time. It put me through private school for 3 years when I was making money for commercial fishing on salmon seine boats. And then I would travel the coast. And when I graduated from high school, I went full time into commercial fishing and covered the entire British Columbia coast for decades. And I would talk with other fishermen, most of them being fellow First Nations from other tribes and communities throughout the British Columbia coast. And the subject of Sasquatch always came up. And I was so intrigued by how many people had stories and beliefs and dances, songs, carvings, you name it. And of course, the non-Indians would talk about it with their encounters. And I soon realized that most people that work on fish boats or out in the logging on the coast, big percentage of them have stories, encounters that have taken place. I, grew up reading all the books, went to see Leonard Nimoy with his, I can't remember, Unsolved Mysteries or something at the movie theater. And it sort of, that's what sparked my real interest. And I started buying books and from John Green and others and reading about Sasquatch, Bigfoot all over North America. And then sort of it went on the back burner. I just lived my life and I eventually ended up in the Broughton Archipelago, which is a labyrinth of probably well over 1,000 islands off northeastern Vancouver Island and the mainland. And was a native watchman in our tribe's abandoned native village with carvings and of totem poles on the ground that had fallen down. Big house remains, which were our ceremonial big house during the early 1900s. But prior to that, they were the modern way, the way our people lived. And started hearing things at night, especially towards the end of summer when the fall was coming on. And you'd hear whooping and big, long, screaming howls. And you knew it wasn't wolves, it wasn't bears or owls. And, I began to wonder. And in 1991, we went into the Village Island area and we anchored my commercial fish boat out that I was captaining. And we had an encounter. We saw two of them, a male and a female, in the spotlight from the boat on the beach. And, we'd had a few things happen a couple of years before that. We heard things and smelled things. And then that was my first real good sighting. And that was it. I was, I wanted to know more. And that's when I guess I sort of started spending a little more time in the bush. Eventually, I would become a bear hunting guide for a guide outfitter on his big 100-foot yacht, traveling all through the Broughton Archipelago, hunting. Things would happen. I would see things that were out of the ordinary from other animals. And then, I'd hear from other people about their encounters. And then I got into ecotourism and full time in, I guess, the mid 1990s, late 1990s into 2000. Had a few more encounters, got chased out of my sea kayak camp which was 5 cabins that looked like native style traditional longhouses with native designs on them. In 2006, 4 of us got pushed out by 2 Sasquatches that weren't too happy with us being there. I saw one of them, a big male, and we got out of there. And I guess you could say I was, kind of, intrigued that I would be blessed to see them, and, didn't really like the idea they were mad at us, I guess. And then I just kept working in the bush. And in the mid 2000s, I got together with my partner. I'm with Peggy, and I went to see her down in Kent, Washington, south of Seattle. And we're watching TV, and I looked at, we were watching, I think it was Finding Bigfoot and a few other shows. And I looked at her, I said, "What's wrong with all the non-native people? They say if these things exist, maybe these things are real. We don't know." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Those things are real. They're all over out there in the bush. I've heard them, seen them, smelled them." And, we talked about it. And then that's one year she said, "Why don't you go to one of those conferences?" So I did. I went to a conference in Washington State. I started to debate with someone who was on stage as a speaker. I was saying, "No, you're wrong about that." And all of a sudden they asked me to elaborate, which I did. And the next thing you know, they asked me to go on stage to talk. And then word got out, I guess, that I knew a little bit about Sasquatch on an Indian perspective and a Bushman perspective. And I spoke to Wes Germer. He invited me on his show, Sasquatch Chronicles. And that sort of opened it all up to me, where people were phoning me, emailing me, want me to be on their television shows, help them produce shows. They wanted me to go to conferences, where now my wife, my common law wife, and I, we go around the conferences, and our Junoch regalia, our mask and our costume that we made, she'll perform that on the stage, as well as Bukwus, which is a smaller creature in my people's lore and legends. And, we have fun, but we share the Indian perspective to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and my personal experience. So I guess in a nutshell, that's what I do. I got my own podcast, Sasquatch Island, with Monster X Radio. I have a partner with Wild Woman Media, where we're doing documentaries and a series about the First Nations and North American Indian perspectives and beliefs to Sasquatch. And from time to time, I get invited in other people's shows. And I guess you could say I'm, one of those Indians in North America that's, willing to share our stories, perspectives, encounters, and how we investigate and what we know about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, just the other tribe that's out there sharing our homelands with us since the dawn of creation. So there you go.
So I was gonna ask the particular belief system or facts that you guys believe. What are you thinking? They're a different. You just said they're a different tribe. So are they different people or form of people? What do you believe in that?
Well, when I first started out, I used to think they were, North America's undiscovered great ape, because the late Dr. John Bindernagel was the one who interviewed me and became my good friend, and we investigated together. And him and I would, he would sort of coax me along that they're North America's undiscovered great apes. So I put them in that context. And it wasn't until a little bit later that he educated me on himself and me that possibly they were Gigantopithecus blacki, a derivative of that came over on the Bering Land Bridge. And a few years go by, and I sat down with John, and I'm like, "Hey, John, I don't think they're an ape. I think, as the native people say, the other tribe, I think they're just another form of human, because we have humans that have larger livers that live up in the Arctic because of all of the seal and whale oil that they're accustomed to eating. So they have a larger liver. Evolution, adaptation of their body through, change, so they can live in their environment and eat what they eat." And then the people in the Himalayas and the Andes, the indigenous tribes, they have a larger lung capacity because they live at such high elevation with lower oxygen. And then you have the African bush people in South Africa, that the female has an adaptation over genitalia. They don't even know what it's for, the last I read about it. And then, of course, you have the pigments that are different colored than humans based upon the environments they live in, the amount of sun they get. So nature's code dictates that evolution is always going to be there. There's always going to be change within species to make it so it has better chance of survival. And I've just come to the conclusion with Sasquatch, of course, it's just speculation. We're just investigating. We're not researching yet until we get a subject. But my speculation as an investigator is like a dog that goes wild or a pig that goes wild, they become feral, larger body, longer hair, more aggressive. Pigs grow tusks, so dogs, they get wilder where they won't come to the masters no more. They become part of the wild pack. The feral takes over. And I think that's what the Sasquatch is. I think thousands of years ago, and we have to look at the 1980s comedy called The Gods Must Be Crazy. And that's where I got the idea from, that the humans were sitting there thousands of years ago in North America, the tribes, and some of the tribes leaders would look and say, okay, look at us now. We've sort of evolved from hunting woolly mammoths and camels and the horses. We've pretty much made them extinct. But now we have shelters that are permanent and semi-permanent. We have mass amounts of weapons made out of different types of high-grade stone. We have, because we have not so much hunter-gatherers in some regions, we've elaborated on our materialism. So we have, like my tribe, potlatch system. It's all about competing with one another, being richer and crest and wealth. And then you have warfare. And just like the gods must be crazy, materialism led to ego, led to anger, led to hostility within his tribe. So he took that empty Coca-Cola bottle that was thrown out of an airplane that his tribe members got a hold of. Now they're fighting over it. And he was going to bring it to the edge of the world and give it back to the gods because it disrupted the whole tribe, his family unit. And I think that's what Sasquatch humans were doing at one time. They were looking at where they'd evolved to, this mere materialistic ego push type of social structure where everyone's competing with one another. They're gossiping about one another. There's pettiness. There's probably crime, murder, and warfare. And I think they said to their family clans, enough. We're going to leave everything here that's modern, and we're going to walk into those forests naked, and we're going to go back to where we used to be. I call it not regression, but progressing back to the original way we lived. And I think that's what those humans did. And when they went back into the forest without fire, without weapons, without permanent shelter, they became hunter-gatherers, seasonal, nomadic people. And then evolution took over and they got bigger, more muscles. They got longer hair. And then, of course, they're competing with the hairless bipedal creature, the human, who has weapons and fire, and they fight in mass. They have canoes, bows and arrows, you name it. Well, my tribal laws say that if you're caught in someone's shellfish beach or fish harvesting area or berry patch, clover patch, in the old times, you would be killed for intervening, trespassing, stealing someone else's food. So if that was my law prior to European contact and just afterwards, well, what would my tribe members be doing 500 years ago when they came across Sasquatches digging in their shellfish beds or their berry patches? They would probably attack them. And I think that's why thousands of years ago, the Sasquatch evolved to the humans of the night. And then, of course, living so in tune with the environment without tools and clothing, evolution took care of them to give them that feral type body, bigger, hairier. And in some cases, we even hear very aggressive to us, hairless bipedal creatures. So that's my take on them. I think they're just the feral human. And then when I do dabble with reading the stuff on DNA, and it's always the same old BS, arguing about it, debating about it, trying to find out why that person's DNA study is flawed or wrong or contaminated. There's that pettiness and that ego-ness, everyone fighting amongst themselves. So that's why I don't get into DNA, because 10 years from now, some scientist is going to step up. He or she will say everything from back pre-2019 was wrong. And now our way of analyzing DNA is truthful. But yet we look at DNA and we always hear the same thing. It's primate, close to human. It's contaminated by human DNA. So maybe they are just human. They're just bigger and hairier, and they have nocturnal vision. That's my take on a Sasquatch, what it is.
So, based on the encounters and stuff that you have had, can you give us, I guess, to the best of your ability, um, accurate of uh, an accurate description of what you've seen? Because I feel like your description now is going to be different from what the quote unquote normal view of a Sasquatch is.
Well, what I saw, it didn't come out of a porthole, it didn't cloak, and it sure as heck didn't come in or out of a UFO. They're critters, just like us. They leave tracks, they harvest food, they defecate, they have babies. There's nothing magical about them. They're just another living, breathing critter that possibly has infrasound like a tiger or a hippopotamus or an elephant that can make that low decibel level to possibly harm or create anxiety within their prey. That's about as far to the far end of the spectrum as I'll go with
As far as
Sasquatch's
the
infrasound.
woo,
Yeah, well, I won't even never touch. I'll never cross the woo side. To me, it's Sasquatch is number one with my tribal beliefs, or we treat them with respect. We don't ever go into the forest hunting them. We, God forbid, will never kill them or try to kill them. We will always respect them. And by speculating and putting the hypotheses out that they cloak and they go through portholes and they're from another dimension, they zip around in UFOs, that is so disrespectful to the other tribe. We haven't been invited to sit at the blanket or the ground, the mat, the grass with the other tribe. So why would we even dare to think about stepping over the woo line and start disrespecting them by throwing wooism at them? That's my beliefs, my opinion. I'll stand behind it. I just think it's very disrespectful. But at the same time, out of respect for my fellow North American Indian tribes that do believe it, I'm not from their tribe. So I respect what they believe. I don't pry about it. I don't talk about it. It's their beliefs, their tribal beliefs, and I will honor and respect them for that. And if some of them believe that Sasquatch is on the woo side, that's their choice. It's not for me to debate.
now, with your particular tribe, have you found any books or anything um, from, I guess I would quote unquote, the olden days where they talk about these? Have you uncovered any of that, or is that information passed down at all?
Oh, absolutely. Every time I go to a potlatch, and which is our great celebration of life that a chief and his family will throw in honor of a memorial for someone who's passed on or family members, a marriage potlatch, a potlatch just to say, hey, I'm going to share my wealth with the nation and all the people that come visit. And I'm going to share my wealth by feeding everyone and opening my family's gildas, our symbolic box of treasure, which is where all the crests are kept. Every crest the family has was acquired through marriages where dowries are paid for the acquisition of a crest. With the crest comes the right to display it, a tier of level of what it's worth and its value, and the right to tell the story, share the crest in art, bring the crest to life in dance and song with masks and regalia at potlatches. And the Sasquatch, what we call Chonacha, is the highest and most valuable crest to this day. So to this day, when I go to a family's potlatch and you hear the drummers pounding on a hollow cedar log 20 feet long, 40 of them sometimes sitting around that hollow cedar log, pounding on it. The walls are vibrating, the floor is vibrating. You can feel the pounding of the drum in your chest. And in deep baritone song, that legend comes to life in song. And then all of a sudden, that legend comes to life from behind the krillas, the screen. The Chonacha mask of the family crest and the costume they've made will come out onto the floor, and it will dance according to what their ancestor witnessed when they saw that Chonacha. And some families, they'll have a baby on their back. My family will have a female Sasquatch come out, a Chonacha, and she's does all her posturing, like rubbing her eyes and yawning because she's tired when the human sees it because they wake them up because it's daytime and Sasquatch is nocturnal. And then all of a sudden it's looking around and it's posturing how it throws bad children into its basket, but it's looking. And then towards the end of the dance, it finds what it's looking for. You hear a wee, 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 and a little baby Sasquatch, which is Jonochwa, which is one of our young kids dressed in regalia of a mask and costumes, comes running onto the dance floor. And the big Jonochwa mother, she squats down, and the baby jumps into the basket on the back, and the Jonochwa runs off the floor behind the screen again. That's the end of the dance. Every family does it different. I just gave you a narrative on what my family does. But when you go to a potlatch, you will see it depicted in so many different ways. And so when you go to a potlatch, that's that chief and his family opening and expelling from their tower all of the data, all their history that goes back to the dawn of our creation and even further into the time when there was only animals. And Sasquatch, called Chunahua, male and female, is always a part of the potlatch.
That I feel like that's something amazing to be a part of. Just hearing it from the outside makes you kind of jealous. So I think that's awesome. That's awesome tradition. Something awesome to do. Um, I would say part of tonight's video or interview is you brought up something on Facebook and you were talking about diseases we may have passed on to Sasquatch through the centuries. Now, I want to go ahead and get into that with you. Before we do that, though, I just want to say all of you who are joining us live right now, I want to say thank you so much. That means you're a subscriber. That means you found us on Facebook or somehow. And I want to say thank you for being a part of us, the part of the show tonight. If you are watching this after the fact and you like what you hear tonight, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so that when we do go live, you can join us in the comments. Thomas, I usually go into the comments and I say hi to everybody, just so I tell them thank you for showing up and being a part of it. Black Eyed Kid, we have Keith in here, we have Robert K, we have Robert Jr., we got Tater Plays, we got Keith, Isaac.
Hey, Tater.
Oh, you know Tater.
Yeah, I've seen Tater pop up from time to time.
Yeah, he goes in everywhere. We got Cryptid 559, we got Wood Booger Farm, we got Donna Book. If any of you guys like to would like to ask questions, feel free to ask them now. Keep copying and pasting them so I'll see it if I don't get to it. And we'll be able to ask him questions. I know Tater asked, does he think they might be able to use fire? So is that something you can give us a quick answer to?
Yes. I've heard a few reports. They're pretty elusive from what I'm gathering because the reports that I've gotten from my region of Western Canada, Pacific Northwest, Washington State, it's always in a place that's hours walking away from where any human would usually be. So someone getting out of going hunting is, they're 3 hours out up above the tree line. They come across the little cavern and lo and there's some bones on the ground, some branches dragged in, awful stench, and the remains of fire inside. So yeah, I believe they do use fire.
Okay, cool. I haven't really looked into nor heard a lot about the whole fire situation. That's actually a pretty new one for me.
Well, you have to remember my investigator, who's a Omaha tribe member out of Macy, Nebraska. And what he's taught me the times I've been out there and teaches me every week when I video chat with him 2 or 3 times. One of the first things he taught me about Sitonga, the keeper of the medicine, their Sasquatch. And when I came out of Nebraska 3 years ago and I emailed Dr. John Bindernagel, what's his name? Les Stroud, Todd Neese, and Meldrum. When I emailed them all, the title of the email was, I have found Tarzan. Lucas interacted with him as a young boy when he was kicked out of the village because his father died. His mother didn't want him to look after him. He ran away from foster care. He stayed in the bush from March until freeze up every year. But the most important thing he taught me was, Tom, they have laws. They have very strict laws. I have a lot to teach you, Tom, and tell you. in time. He always tells me that. He always allows me to know that they have laws, very strict laws. They have culture, they have language. So to me, the other tribe, and I think fire use, I think, is probably one of their big, I guess you could say, taboo things, that you just can't be lighting fires all the time because of their strict laws. Number one, so they don't get caught. Number two, so they don't get sloth and lazy and pampered and all of a sudden open that door to what we suffer with, that materialism, that comfortness where, oh, what do you mean I got to work for 12 hours? I'm a commercial fisherman. I work for 2 days on end. I'm just warming up. But people nowadays, they always got to whine and gripe about something. And I think big part of that would be the use of fire, always having that comfort, that heat.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a no-no if, like you said, you believe part of the reason why they went away is to avoid, the luxuries and stuff like that. And I mean, let's face it, fire is a huge luxury, and fire is what started everything. So I would see, I would and agree on with you on that. I would like to ask you though, and get on to the main reason why I think a lot of people are here is to talk about your opinion and what you think of diseases we may have passed on to the Sasquatch through the centuries. So can you get into that?
So what it's all based on is who studies this history constantly and have since I was a young boy. And we know that smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, and something most people don't know, venereal disease, eradicated the indigenous tribes of all the Americas, from the Arctic right down to Terra del Fuego at the south tip of the South America. And we know that the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe in 1921, prior to contact, it was guesstimated and still is guesstimated through archaeological records and oral histories that there was some 30 to 35,000 Kwakwaka'wakw people within my tribe. In 1921, the Dominion of Canada sent out people to do a census. They couldn't find 1,200 Kwakwaka'wakw remaining. Smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis had eradicated us. The 1918, 1919 Spanish flu decimated our villages. Prior to that, it was the 1896 third wave of smallpox to sweep our region. So humans dropped. 1965, I was born, and there was probably about 12 or 1,300 Kwakwaka'wakw. 54 years later, I don't even know what our number is, but I would guesstimate we're well over 10, 12,000 Kwakwaka'wakw now. And if you look at every other indigenous tribe throughout the Americas, and don't forget the Hispanic people from Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, that's the biggest indigenous tribe in all of North America. And we have proliferated like bunny rabbits. You can't go anywhere without seeing a nice copper, dark skin of us indigenous, because we have healthcare. We have warm houses now. And, the indigenous numbers are through the roof. Now, if we use that same timeline as I have done, and you look at how 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, my good friend Bob, they filmed Patty. And just after that, we start seeing a bell curve of increasing sighting activities going up steadily, more so in the last 20 years. It's gone up like a rocket ship. Now, if we go back to the first printing presses that came to the Americas on the East Coast, and nowadays a lot of investigators are pulling stuff out from the archives. We see it on all the different groups. I'm a member of probably close to 100 Sasquatch Bigfoot groups in cryptozoology. So you're seeing all of those ones that we saw in books in the past, and new ones that are coming out of archives of mountain devils, Jersey devils, skunk apes, rougarous, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the list goes on. These big hair-covered bipedal creatures were really seen. Even Leif Erikson, the first Caucasian to come to North America, reported them. And other explorers when they first came, Christopher Columbus and the other Spanish and British and the early Americans, talk of a lot of Sasquatches. But at the same time, they're coming west across the continent. But the printing presses are coming too. And you see the odd report. But as the 1700s turn into the 1800s, especially around the late 1860s. Just after 1865, the end of the Civil War, we see a big void of Sasquatch reports, Bigfoot reports, Jersey Devil, Rougarous, and so forth. And it stays like that until about 1940s, when all of a sudden Ruby Creek from Canada comes forth, and this one comes forth from down in the States. And we start to see a little bit more reports in the old newspapers about Sasquatch. And then all of a sudden, 1967, Roger Patterson, Bob Gimlin, it starts going up even more. The world, number one, got educated to Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Yeah, some people were just seeing shadows, but at the same turn, since Patterson Gimlin, we have seen an increase in Sasquatch activity. Omaha Indian Reserve has an 11 o'clock curfew from 11 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning. They don't want any tribe members on the streets because it's an enclave within the Indian Reserve of a lot of hardwood forest, black walnut, I think it is, and oak, and it's along the Missouri River. Well, east of that is Iowa, which is nothing but a clear-cut cornfield with farmhouses and silos. West of that, nothing but clear-cut cornfields and soybean fields. North of that and south of that, the same thing, except you have these bands of trees and foliage along the tentacles of meandering streams. I've seen it from the airplanes in Google Earth, leading into hot spots like Oklahoma, leading up into northern Omaha Indian Reserve. But the whole reserve itself is an enclave of hardwood forest with farms all around it for hundreds of miles. Yet the population is going up astronomically in the Omaha Indian Reserve and just outside of it. And down south of there in Oklahoma, the numbers are starting to increase. Texas, we're seeing a huge increase in Sasquatch sightings. But at the same turn, we're seeing a huge increase in the number one protein, year-round protein, hogs. Feral hogs going wild in all areas are giving the Sasquatches easy access to protein, which means a little bit more leisure time, which means a little bit more fornication. And I saw a pregnant Sasquatch in the Omaha Indian Reserve 2 years ago. And we have so many reports about juvenile Sasquatches all over Sasquatch Island, aka Turtle Island. That's what the Indians called it. And we also call it North America. I call it Sasquatch Island, because even up in the Northwest Territories, where I was, there was more sightings of Naga, their Sasquatch. Omaha Indian Reserve, Sitonga, British Columbia, Onahua, Books, Howakwas, Gogith, and other names of Sasquatch all through North America. The numbers are going up. Why? Well, number one, human sprawl, lots of farms, lots of food for them, easy access to protein, feral hogs as well. But now you factor in they survived the diseases. They built up immunities to measles, smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, possibly even venereal disease, as did we humans. But at the same time, Sitonga from the Omaha, what they call a Sasquatch, keeper of the medicine. All the tribes talk about the shamans' apprentices going out into the forests, out into the scrublands and deserts for months, years at a time. What were those shamans doing? They were interacting with the other tribe, learning the medicinal plants, as a medicine woman taught me how she works with Sitonga and Omaha Indian Reserve to know what plants are good at certain seasons for medicinal reasons. So that's what the shamans were doing. Well, if they were going to the Sasquatches for natural remedies to learn that, we hairless bipedal ones, well, give the Sasquatches benefit of the doubt. They're masters at hiding in their environment. Well, they're also masters at knowing the edible and medicinal properties to the plants and other things out in their environment. So that being said, a lot of people I talk to, I say, you guys are so busy looking around for tree structures and tracks and nests. I'm beyond that. I've seen them already. I'm out trying to look for that Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall moment with the Sasquatches, knowing full well they hate us, despise us, loathe us, fear us. Why would they fear the human? Because we're filthy, rotten critters. Their oral history is telling them that we carry disease. As the population swept of the newcomers across North America from Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Pacific off ships inland, Well, all of a sudden, when new people showed up, so did these smallpox lesions. So did coughing and mucus coming out, so that your loved one would die from lungs being filled with mucus and coughs. And there's all your flus and measles, probably even chicken pox. Look how deadly chicken pox even is to this day. Measles is coming back again. So the diseases that we know eradicated the indigenous tribes, we have oral histories about Sasquatches coming to Gogeeth, the Sasquatch name out of Haida Gwaii, where the Haida natives live up in northwestern British Columbia in their island archipelago home. I lived up there. I heard the elders tell me their oral history about how Gogeeth would come into the community carrying their babies, dragging their sick ones, and looking at the Haida people with pleading eyes and, like, what's going on? Look at my family. They're covered in all these big bubbles and everything. And the chiefs looking at the Sasquatches and then telling their people, go inside and bring out our sick. And the humans would come out with their babies dragging their adults that were succumbed to smallpox. And the Gogeeth clans, the Sasquatches, saw this. They saw that even the humans couldn't help them, so they just turned and walked back into the forest from where they came. We have stories of when the Spanish flu came, 1918, 1919, to the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia. We have stories of that tuberculosis had just swept through and took out a lot of our loved ones. Well, now all of a sudden, the Spanish flu shows up from the First World War, from the troops coming over back home. And the First World War shut down, not because it was a stalemate, it's because no one could find any able-bodied warriors to go to war because they all had Spanish flu. So they ship them back to their homelands. They bring the Spanish flu. They go back to their home towns and villages, logging camps. And the next thing you know, there were stories that I picked up about they too were affected by the Spanish flu. So we have so many examples in the native oral histories. A lot of people, there's one person who was a little bit high on himself. I felt like kicking on his butt. He was such a pompous beep. But anyway, he said, how do you people know so much that we don't know? And I thought, wow, that's awful high and almighty of you, sir. I said, you got to remember, you watch Sasquatch Bigfoot shows. You see us Indians get about 32 seconds television spotlight time. And the non-native host and co-hosts and interview people are all non-native getting the lion's share of time. And I'm not being offensive or anything to the people, but, listening to another non-Indian talk about their Sasquatch encounters about as dry as a popcorn burp. It's getting very repetitive. We've heard it a million times. And people are wanting to know more about Sasquatch, and that's what I advocate. Come sit with us natives. We will tell you stuff that we haven't even told you yet. We will bring from our oral history, and in some cases written history, tape recorded history, reel-to-reel tape recorded history. That's some of the stuff I've been listening to in the archives. And you will hear the stories pertaining to Sasquatch in North America, and you will see the correlation of the diseases by us humans, how it was passed or picked up by the Sasquatches, and they're suffering them. So to me, investigating is investigating everything. Finding out why we're having a population increase led me to get the oral histories and ask those key questions, where it's just not about how big was it, how big was the distance of the eyes, how big were the teeth, how big was the distance between the top of the lip and the bottom of the nose, because I find they're very pronounced in Sasquatches. How long was the hair on the arms? But now I ask the other questions. What is your tribe's oral histories on disease being passed over from the newcomers to your tribes and then to the Sasquatch? Oh, it's funny you should ask that, Tom. This is what my great-grandfather told me when I was a young kid. And they're opening up their data banks. Their towers are spewing forth that have been sitting there in memory for decades. And I'm asking those key questions, and I'm getting the stuff that is opening my eyes. And I'm like, wow, who knew it was that bad? Where now, someone answered me, and it tweaked my curiosity from John Green's book, Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, back in the 80s when I bought that book and read it. but there's an account in there. I think that was that book anyway, but about some old timer going into this place in British Columbia, and the Sasquatches had open sores all over their body. And I was kind of thinking, geez, I wonder what that would have been, because it was after the smallpox epidemic. So maybe smallpox was still lingering within the Sasquatch community. I don't know. But then just recently, I had someone from central British Columbia's coast region, in an area, or northern British Columbia, where the tribes live in a very semi-isolated, away place from the main non-native communities. And as he's telling me what he saw, the Sasquatch, he drew a picture. It's on Sasquatch Island. If you scroll through about a month and a half, you'll see this pencil drawing of the Sasquatch, and it's got these big warts on its left side of the face. The guy said the pigmentation of the body was really different than a human, a chimpanzee. There was pinkish, light-colored spots. The fingers almost looked deformed. The mouth even looked deformed, and the eyes looked really cloudy. And right there, I knew leprosy. I remember all those times reading National Geographic, and back in the 80s, reading the National Geographic about the leprosy camps that they had in Hawaii. And then I read about the Corsi Island here in British Columbia, which was a leprosy camp. I read those books and archive stuff decades ago, and it all came back to me. I thought, my God, that region's Sasquatches possibly could have leprosy because of the deformity, because of the smoky colored eyes, and the pigmentation that's not proper for what it should be. And I thought, well, apparently armadillos are a natural carrier of the leprosy virus or whatever it is. So leprosy is also found within our soils of North America and my region. So there's a good possibility that those Sasquatches have leprosy, and hence why they're very aggressive as well. Because the spin-off to leprosy, as it progresses, the human will get very aggressive. Do you blame them? Their face is broken, their fingers are all disappeared, their vision's going. People shun them. People probably so intimidated and threatened by them, they probably put guns up to them back in the early 1900s. So it would stand to reason that a leper would get very aggressive. But at the same turn, I know I would get very aggressive if I looked in the mirror every day and saw my features being destroyed from a virus that was passed to me by who knows who. You know, like right now, I was in Kent, Washington last week, and there was the 5th case of measles was reported in Kent. And when I read the news release, I went, oh, for God's sakes, that person was in the same Fred Meyer that I go to every day. That child was there with measles. I'm an Indian. I'm very susceptible to getting measles if the virus is around. And my hostility and my aggression went up. And I thought, God, if I ever saw a parent that had a kid infected with measles around me, or tuberculosis, you know, these are things that killed my relatives off. Measles almost killed me as a kid. So I'm seeing why maybe some of you that are following, can't remember what's his name. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, the guy who does Missing 411. I enlightened him about an area of British Columbia where there's been a lot of disappearances. And some are saying to me that some of the disappearances were attributed to the other tribe, and the same region that possibly could have leprosy amongst the other tribe in these modern days. So the disease thing is something that, you know, it's not that I'm obsessed with it or anything. It's helping me to understand the decrease of the Sasquatch populations and the increase. And that way I can kind of get a rough timeline. And it helps my investigations where, like today, I was in the Nanaimo, Vancouver Island area, which has recently become a very hot spot of Sasquatches. But one of the things I noticed out where me and my sister went, far afield to the west into the mountains and the valleys, I could see the berries. The plants were heavy with berries, loganberries, raspberries, strawberries. And I wasn't seeing any big pushes through the foliage that would be indicative of elk or bears or Sasquatch. I'm a tracker. I was doing my tracking as we were driving around and getting out from time to time. But then I thought about it and I said, wait a second, I'm not going to find these Sasquatch way out there because soon the salmon will be in the rivers, but the berries on big time. But if the local regional berries are in heavy bloom and we're in drought conditions too, well, Sasquatches aren't dumb. They know the humans have sprinklers, hoses. They're always tending their gardens. So these strawberries are just little wee, half the size of a pencil's eraser. So they're not lush and juicy. There's a drought. The raspberries were the size of the top of your pinky. Not very big this year because of the drought. The Logan berries are real bitter and not as big as they should be. So a Sasquatch is sitting there going, gee, it's a drought on right now. All the sloughs turning brown. We got cedar trees all over the place, dying here, dying there. We know about the drought. Maybe we would pull closer to the urban edge where the hairless ones live. Because when their TVs go off and those lights quit flickering in the lower floors, and the porch lights go off and the first floor lights go off and then the bedroom light goes off, we know we can go up to those houses and listen, and we can hear them snoring and farting away at our sleeping, REM sleep. Now it's time for us to go to their chicken coops, their stables, get their carrots for their horse, get their oats for their animals, get their rabbit feed, get their rabbits, get their eggs. But because there's drought conditions and they use sprinklers and they have access to water, well, their fruits and berries are going to be plump. The cherries are blooming right now, the thimbleberries. Salmon berries are over. Logan berries, if they have them in their gardens, are going. Kale is up. The carrots are up. So the highest concentration of seasonal protein right now in the Nanaimo region of Vancouver Island is in the urban environment. Dumpsters, compost box, and all of the stuff we grow, because every city is basically the same. You have the small plots of land in the city center, but when you get to the fringes where the richer people live with the bigger yards and the farms at one time used to be there, and now the farms are, hobby farms, but the fruit trees and the berry trees are bigger because they've been growing for decades. So that's why we're seeing all along from southern tip of Vancouver Island up to the central part of Campbell River, we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of Sasquatch sightings and encounters at the edge of our urban environment, because the Sasquatch numbers are growing higher, but they are also getting smarter. And hey, why should I be out there groveling away eating drought-ridden, dry, sour berries when I just have to walk over a ridge or two and I can be eating someone's cherry tree that they water every day? That's the way I do my investigating. Kind of think a little bit out of the box at times. And hopefully it helps you guys that are listening to better your investigations.
And I think it does, and I think a lot of what you said does make sense. Um, as far as the population growth, you're not the only person who's brought this up in the last 2 years. You're not the only person who is claiming this to be true and is something that they're seeing in their research or something that they're hearing. I'm gathering the sightings, I'm gathering the emails and stuff that I get, for me personally, and then listening to other people as well. Population increase, especially within the last 2 years, seems to be something that is happening. Also, your whole timeline thing of going through figuring out, when these people crossed this, when did this uh, um, nation invade this nation, when did these people come to these people, and tracking the diseases and all the stuff that they brought along with them overseas. That all makes sense for a timeline, and I think that's great, and more people should do that, at least timeline-based research where they're from. I live in Florida. There's a lot of native Indian tribes in Florida that, if you look back, you can tell in a specific time period, what tribes dominated what lands of Florida. And that's another timeline thing that people can go through and dig up. I'd also say, what you're seeing what you're doing, I think it's all great. And I believe it's a different approach. Maybe, like you said, you hear the same things over and over again because pretty much sightings aren't going to change. So
No.
why are we looking for the things we already know? It's time to start looking for the things we don't know, or looking for the things that aren't as obvious. And I would agree with you on that, 100%.
Yeah, like one of the things we're looking at into now is the possibility of meat being stowed in avalanche chutes in the Pacific Northwest. Started putting some evidence together about that. It's an ongoing investigation, mind you, but some of the reports that we've gotten about, seeing Sasquatch going up a mountain, goes to an avalanche chute, goes into, you can see the blocks of ice being moved, and all of a sudden it's walking downhill and it's got a half a deer over its shoulders. So, stands to reason if you're looking for ice, you go to an avalanche chute. It's there year round in some mountains. So there's a lot of different things in Omaha, Nebraska area. Lucas is on the ground looking this time of the year. He's looking at the traffic from when soybeans get ready to be harvested in the corn. He's going to be looking for their caches. He found one last year that was just filled with cobs and husk. So, it's, things that are going to hopefully increase your chance of getting that crispy video or that good crispy picture, or hopefully that sit down and interact with them so you can get some really good video on that. Then we can see, hopefully getting that conclusive proof by video and camera of Sasquatch, because, I'm not a condoner of shooting one. So that's not even a mind thought right now. I don't even think that way. But, sitting down with them with a nice Android 7 and videotaping their epidermal ridges on their soles of their feet, their nails, maybe even getting them to the point where you can videotape inside their mouth. And when you go out and you can show a video of a pupil dilating or whatever they call it when it gets bigger, who's going to argue with that? That's conclusive proof in my books.
Yeah, and I would say, the end goal, for most people is to say, hey, let's shoot this video, for everybody to see it, and so it's more accepted, or it is quote unquote proved that these things do exist. Now, I will say a lot of people don't care, if that's the case. They know for themselves. A lot of people don't even want the general public to accept it because there are some things that go along with that, as um, they're trophy hunters and people like that that'll go out and try to hunt these things if they think they're not human, as far as what you've presented, but more as like the ape creature or more along those lines. So there's like a half and half point, and but I would agree that shooting a video of something, I think that's a fair. I would like to see that as well, and a great conclusive video, and I think that would be great. I'm not against that at all. Anyway, I don't believe.
Yeah, but the big thing is we have the government and the one percenters that are gonna and are fighting us tooth and nail. They make the ones that do come in disappear. They intimidate some investigators that get a little bit too hot on the trail, I guess you could say, up here in Canada anyway. And what it's all about is the marbled murrelet and the spotted owl. Look at the hundreds of millions of hectares of forest land in Canada and the United States that was lost to mineral extraction and logging and resource extraction and development because of the endangered marblet and the spotted owl. And up here in Canada, we have 3 indigenous tribes. We have the Inuit from the north. We First Nations that are from coast to coast and everything in between. And then we have the Métis, which are the half and halfers. Well, that Métis, the Inuit and us First Nations, we have status. We have land claims. We have a lot of perks. We're more Canadian than Canadian. And then all of a sudden, the Métis now, they have recognition status and perks that come with them. So they're more Canadian than Canadian. Can you imagine what it's going to be like when the other tribe comes out with conclusive proof? Well, us Indians and the Inuit and the Métis, we're going to be telling the government, you back off. We want our traditional territories, which we've always told you is the traditional territories of the other tribe, protected. I went for a road ride on a vehicle today with my sister, probably 40 miles into the interior of south central Vancouver Island that I hadn't been to since the early 80s. And I was appalled. I couldn't find a cedar tree over 20 inches in diameter to peel the bark off to make this basket for our Sasquatch regalia for our dancing, so it looks more natural than a basket that we have right now. We had to drive for miles till we found a small little pocket of red cedars that were over 20 inches in diameter. But as far as I could see, nothing but devastation. Forests, clear cut, little scrubby little trees growing if there was any trees. And we wonder why the Sasquatch won't come out and sit with us at our fires, why they just peek at us and disappear. They hate us, despise us, loathe us. Why? Well, going back to the beginning of this video cast, we destroy with fire. They know the exhaust coming out of those machines is fire that's taking out those trees and tearing the environment apart. And when I was living in the bush, I would disappear for months on end. And I know what the Sasquatch, how they feel. Because one time I came to some men that were working in the forest. I'd been out of cigarettes for probably 3 weeks. I could smell their cigarette smoke. I just wanted nothing more than to walk up and give them $20 and sell me a cigarette. But all of a sudden, just like a Sasquatch, I watched them. And I thought, after weeks in the bush and over 3 weeks without a cigarette, the last thing I want right now is to be close to a filthy, rotten human. And I turned and I walked into the forest and I disappeared for another few weeks. So I understand where Sasquatch is coming from. And hopefully they will give me in my lifetime that moment to sit with them. That's all I'm after.
And that would be an awesome honor. And I hope that that's something that you get to do. I really hope that you get to experience that. I mean, as far as everything else, I would agree with you. I also think that your take on everything is an awesome perspective that I have yet to hear. And I think a lot of people haven't heard it that way either. So I'm glad you got to come on and share that, because like I said, that's pretty interesting. I haven't heard it that way. So it's a different outlook, and it's another way to research and go about things. As far as that, Eamon, I really appreciate you coming on tonight and being part of the
Oh, no
show.
problem. And don't forget, I do investigations, Washington State and up here in Vancouver Island. And, just look at SasquatchIsland.com. It's, just got my contacts on there right now, or Sasquatch Island, the Facebook group. Monster X Radio, of course. Get a hold of me if you want to come on an expedition. We don't charge that much. It's basically this for our time and our expenses. And we bring you out to my Sasquatch research camp, where we actually are getting close to hopefully getting some interaction going with the local, what I used to call Scout. Now we call him Elvis, because his hair looks like Elvis Presley from the late 60s. But, I've had 2 paying clients who've seen it. One of them was a professor from the University of Simon Fraser University, a doctor in ecology, and he got to see Elvis, and he just, like he said in his British accent, "I'm so happy I just could piddle my pants," he goes. And then I had a native lady who's working on her doctorate of botany, and she saw him twice in daylight. He peeked out and looked. So we're getting closer, hopefully. And if anyone wants to come out, give me a shout. Come on out, pitter patter. Let's get at her and go see if we can get a video of these things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Go ahead. I when I share this, they'll have access to your group and stuff and your website. I'll go ahead and put it in the description and stuff like that. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Again, thank you for everybody who joined us live tonight. I really appreciate it. I know you guys are talking in the comments, and sometimes it's a lot to read, but I see you guys are talking to each other in there, so that's cool. I love that we have a community here, so I think that's very cool. They talk a lot to each other, and I think that's awesome that they do that.
Good.
Yeah. So with that being said, if you've seen this after the fact, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Go ahead, click that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and again, Thomas, thank you so much for being on, and everybody else. Yeah, thank you so much. And everybody else, hope you enjoyed another episode of Bigfoot the Truth Told.